At this time, I'll call the meeting of the Marshall City Council to order with the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Welcome everyone here this evening. We do have an agenda before us. I'll ask at this point if there's any changes to that agenda, corrections, deletions. If not, we'll operate under that agenda. We'll move to agenda item number 2. Agenda item number 2 is to consider the approval of the minutes of our last regular city council meeting. That was held on January 8, 2019. Council does have the minutes of that meeting. Are there any corrections to note at this time?
We did send in corrections, right?
Correct.
I move approval.
Motion by Craig.
Second.
Seconded by John to approve the minutes as they were presented. We'll move to a vote.
Yeah, I'm not in the vote here. I'm not in.
It was joking the whole time.
No, I mean, I'm in, but I'm not. My vote doesn't come up. What am I doing wrong here, Kyle?
Over on the left tab. Top.
No, I don't see it.
If you reduce the size of that, I think it's over in the side. Just get rid of that. Right
There it is. Okay, very good. Thank you.
So the council is using a new software program. This is our second meeting, so we'll have a few awkward pauses through the meeting as we get to that. So everyone has voted. We'll close the voting. And that motion does pass. Moving on then, we will move to the next agenda item, which is agenda item number 3. Agenda item number 3 is this is a public hearing. This is a public hearing that will consider moving a dwelling into the residential district. That location is 312 Warsaw Circle. So we'll conduct a public hearing, then following the public hearing, then we will take action on the request. So to conduct a public hearing, I'll call on Jason Anderson, Assistant City Engineer. Jason will make a short presentation about the request, and then we'll open up for any public comment.
Thank you, Mayor. So city ordinance outlines the procedure for moving a house into Marshall city limits. The process includes on-site inspection, a public hearing, and city council approval. The house to be moved here is currently located in Milroy. It's 1,500 square foot, 1 story with a two-stall garage built in 1968. The house was inspected by our building services coordinator and found to be in good condition. The house will be re-sided and re-roofed prior to moving, and the home will be set on a new basement. The residential area where this house will be moved does have covenants, but we feel that this home meets those covenants. According to city ordinance, the aesthetics is what the council should be reviewing for, and approval should be granted if the council determines that the house fits into the neighborhood.
We'll open up for any public comment as part of this public hearing. Any questions that the council does have? John?
Just confirmation, owner, I think we were told at least ADA that although it probably isn't necessary, but there would be new siding and new shingles. Is that,
I didn't hear the first part of what you said.
is there? I say although it isn't necessary, we talked about an EDA that there would be new siding and a new roof. Is that correct?
Correct.
So it will look very much like a new house when it's moved in.
Correct.
I believe new windows.
New windows too. Okay.
Any other input from either the council or the members of the audience?
The only input, this is the area that my partner are developing in, and with the new windows, new siding, this house is going to match what we're currently building. We're currently building one level, per se, Rambler style houses, so It'll fit in there well. You know, obviously, I'll abstain from this vote because of the lots I own out there, but I just want to make a comment that with the new siding, new windows, it will fit into that neighborhood very nicely.
With that, I would if there's no other comments as part of the public hearing, I'd entertain a motion to close the public hearing.
So moved.
Motion by Russ, seconded by John to close the public hearing. Discussion? If not, we'll move to a vote. And Jim, you don't have to abstain from this one.
Oh, I did, but
Okay. Is everybody done? We'll close the voting. And the motion does pass. So then we'll move then to the next action. This would be to really act on the request that was discussed at the public hearing to move this dwelling. Questions? If not, is there a motion?
So move.
Second.
Motion by John, seconded by Russ. Discussion? If not, we'll move to a vote. Everybody in? Close the voting. And the motion does pass. And we'll note one abstention. We'll move then to the next agenda item, which is
Consent agenda.
agenda item number 5 is the consent agenda. We'll bring the items up on the screen that are on the consent agenda. And they include consider the resolution regarding the charter assignment of the cable television franchise to Spectrum Mid-America LLC. Consider the approval of special assessment deferral. Consider the authorization to declare vehicles as surplus property for the police department. Consider the vacation of easements in Commerce Industrial Park. Call for a public hearing on the resolution authorizing the vacation of those easements. Consider the application for an on-sale intoxicating liquor license for Marshall Area Chamber of Commerce for an event February 21st, 2019. Consider the application for an exempt permit for the Shades of the Past for June 1st, 2019. Consider the change of venue for on-sale intoxicating liquor license for Holy Redeemer Church for March 23rd, 2019. Consider the change of venue for the application for the exempt permit for Holy Redeemer Church for March 23rd, 2019. Consider the resolution amending the 2019 fee schedule, and then finally consider the approval of the bills and the project payments. So is there any item on the consent agenda that any member of the council wants removed for purposes of separate discussion?
I'd like to remove number 12 and 14, please.
Any other item? If not, we'll allow the clerk a little bit of time to move those agenda items, and in the meantime, I would entertain a motion to approve the remaining items on the consent agenda.
I'll make that motion.
Motion by Jim,
Second.
seconded by John. Discussion? If not, we will move to a vote. Has everyone voted? Close the voting. And a motion does pass. So we will move then to what was agenda item number 12. Russ?
Mr. Mayor, thank you. I talked to City Clerk Kyle about this, and just clarification in my own mind, and I'm bringing it up for that, is that Holy Redeemer wants to move their event from, I believe, the church basement to Bellacino. Bellacino has the liquor license for that facility, where there's, I think, some, how should I say, not clarification, but is the liquor license just for the restaurant, or does it include the event center? And I think Kyle and I talked, and it probably just is included in just the restaurant.
But I just want to make this point, if another organization or a group comes forward, I don't know if Holy Redeemer is going to sell alcohol or if they're going to give it away. Are we going to run into liability issues for that liquor license? And I asked Attorney Dennis Simpson if we would, and he wasn't aware of anything, but I just bring it forth to the council and just, maybe it's food for thought, and that's all. I'm not objecting to it or anything else, but I'm just curious about the liability and everything else, and if any other person could move in, like say a wedding reception, could move into that area and have a wedding reception and not use the liquor that Bellocino would be providing. Don't know.
So, Kyle, do you want to address that? If there is Kyle Box, City Clerk.
So there's a couple of different ways we can answer that. If we want to stick to just this event, Bella Cucino's liquor license is confined to the restaurant itself. The ballroom is not part of their restaurant. They have use for it, but that their liquor license does not cover the ballroom. They can move events into there with temporary licenses such as this. For this particular example, Holy Redeemer is under their own insurance, Catholic Mutual Insurance, so all liquor liability will be with Holy Redeemer for this event. Bella Cucino, to my knowledge, will not be serving the alcohol. The applicant has stated on the application that they will be the ones providing the liquor for this event. So I think there could be a further conversation on future events. It's however they want to move forward with the event. If they would like to contract out Bella Cucino for the license, that's fine, because they are a licensed distributor. And I don't know how that would work I don't know how the lease of the building works with the restaurant, if they can bring in other caterers. I don't know the answer to that. But
it's kind of a unique situation, because I don't believe that there are any other liquor establishments in town that probably has this type of situation. I could be wrong, but the hotel would.
There's a few that come to mind.
Something that I think that maybe the council should be aware of, and moving forward, we just have to be concerned with the liability, because in Bellocino, whether those people could move back and forth, are they totally confined to the event area, or could they move over? You and I had this conversation, right, Kyle, and there's nothing stopping them from going to the restaurant and coming back and forth. So it's just, I bring it up for the council's more so attention, and that's all. I'm not, like I said, I'm not opposed to it. So.
I would just leave with one final thing. The applicant is under the same requirements as any other licensed distributor in the state of Minnesota. They have to follow the same rules and regulations and laws. They can't, as a bar would. So they would have to comply with that.
Thank you, Kyle. And Sharon, you have a comment?
Just one clarification, and I'm not 100%, but the venue space that's adjoining Bella Cucino is not owned by Bella Cucino. It's
Correct.
owned by Schwann's.
Correct.
And they don't have a liquor license. So if the permit holder is not using Bellows, they
Nope.
probably have to get their own license.
Yep, and that's what this is doing. Yep.
Okay. Thanks for the clarification. I would entertain a motion.
I so move.
Second.
Motion by Craig, seconded by Russ. Discussion?
Could you put that back on there? I mean, they said the move is from Holy Redeemer Church to Bella Cucino, but is it?
I don't think it is, but
What's that?
Should be the Schwann's Mercantile, right?
right.
So we can change that wording.
Right.
That might be, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, good catch.
Any other discussion? If not, I'll move us to a vote. Voting's closed. And that motion does pass. Now we'll move to what was agenda item number 14. Consider the resolution amending the 2019 fee schedule. Russ.
First of all, I want to say that, this came up to Ways and Means last evening, and so I brought back my newspaper days. I spent the better part of the night awake thinking about this. So I want to make first thing perfectly clear is that I have my utmost respect for the fire department and the officers that we do have, and we've had in the past, and the officer currently. I was a firefighter for 20 years. My father was a firefighter for 20 years. So, again, I have a lot of respect for the fire department. I think the only thing in the fee schedule that really came forth that was kind of alarming to me is that they wanted to start charging for city fire calls. In our meeting last evening with the Ways and Means, or yesterday afternoon, Fire Chief Brunsvold said they had been doing some of this in the past, and which I, out of town I had understood. I wasn't aware of the in-town, but here's a situation that, I just don't want to put our fire department in a precarious, or our city staff in a precarious situation of making a decision of who they charge, who they don't charge. I'm going to use the term bar pizza. And for those of you that don't know what bar pizza is, it's somebody that's has been out on the town and had a few cocktails, and they go home and they put a pizza in the oven and they fall asleep. The fire department, in my years, we were called to numerous of those calls, and most of the time it involves just smoke, that the fire department has to go ventilate the apartment or the house or whatever the case should be, and that's all it materializes. Situation number two, you have bar pizza, same situation, go home, the person falls asleep. Now this time, some type of minor fire catches happen. Minor fire. So the fire department does have to pull a hose in, more than ventilate. In each situation, the fire department is involved with bringing staff or bringing fire department members. Could be 3, could be 33. We don't know. Quentin said last night the average call is $400 and some dollars. So in this particular situation, the scenario that I just gave you, Quentin probably said he wouldn't charge the first, but maybe charge the second. I hate to put him in that situation of who he's going to charge, who he's not going to charge, put the fire department in. I just think that we need to have a little bit stronger policy regarding the fees, and I'm not opposed to the fees after thinking about it. I think it's very worthwhile. I would encourage the fire department to come with a little better policy and a stronger policy of whether they're going to charge, how much, and they know how much they're going to charge, $750. Because I don't want the bad PR coming out to the fire department and a situation where the insurance company would call up the fire chief and say, well, you didn't bill us for situation number 1, but now you're billing us for situation number 2. What's the difference? You still had $450 worth of manpower on each instance. You had a small fire in the second one. You didn't have a fire in the first one. Maybe I'm making more of this than what I should, but again, I have a real soft spot and a soft spot in my heart for the fire department, and I don't want to put those guys on the line of upsetting people, upsetting insurance companies, upsetting, a bad reputation for the city of Marshall. We've had that in the past where, the city and they're charging for this or charging for that. We've got 12 pages of fees that we charge, and they're all justifiable. Believe me. I mean, we have to pay. We have to charge for the services we offer. But again, I just have really mixed feelings about putting the fire department in that situation of making sure of who they're going to charge. Are they going to charge everybody? Or are they going to charge some? And Quentin, maybe you can respond to this in some way. But again, I respect everything you said and everything you did. I just don't want to see you guys suffer the consequences.
So the fee schedule's always been there. I didn't bring up the fee schedule. I just want to make it easier for people to understand. If it's in town, I want to make it this charge. If it's out of town, I want to make the fee that charge. And I think it's bad PR in order to, I'll give you an example. Just last evening, we get a call to a local citizen that smells propane smell in their garage. All it was, their garage was closed all day. Gas leaked from the carburetor of their snowblower onto the pavement, and it smelled up the garage. But it was a bad smell. It's something they're not supposed to smell. What do? They call the fire department. Everybody calls the fire department for everything, and we're grateful for that. I'm not going to charge that person $750. We're there for 5 minutes. Same thing for the bar pizza. You all put me in this position to make those decisions, is what I feel. I hope you trust me to make those decisions in order to do that. Like we discussed at Ways and Means, it's only about 20 to 30% of the calls actually get billed out. And all it does is I'm trying to
to lower the levy by bringing, like Councilman Bayer-Kohler said, it's a user-based fee. If you use the service, you get charged for it. Now, you have an excellent point by saying, how do you pick and choose? But that's why you put me in this position. And I think I would hopefully make that best decision in order to do so.
And I think past practice is, you know, I think Chief Clath kind of based some of that decision-making based on the equipment that was necessary.
Correct, and that's the other part of it. The way the fee schedule was written before, it didn't specify. It never specified in here that we only need to charge the out-of-town people, and it didn't never specify that we never charge the in-town people. You have an excellent point by saying, well, we pay taxes. Yes, we do pay taxes, but we pay those taxes in order to put fire hoses on fire trucks and fire trucks in the fire station and train firemen to operate that equipment. That's what the taxes pay for. So when you need the service, that's when it gets billed out. I pay taxes on the band shell, and if I want to use it, I have to pay extra for that. If I go to Liberty Park, or excuse me, to Legion Field and use the shelter, I have to call Community Services and reserve the room, or the gazebo, or whatever it is. That's just how it goes. There's nothing free, in my opinion. So that's why I'm trying to make it a point to say, I hope you trust me as you put me in this position to make these decisions on what is necessary to be billed and not.
Quentin, it's not a matter of trust. It's a matter of maybe trying to avoid some of the potential miscommunication and bad PR or something that could potentially come from it. I hope it never happens. I pray to God that I hope it never happens, and I hope that you guys, I know, will continue to do a fine job. You have for the last 100 plus years, and you'll continue to do it for the next 100 years. I just bring it up that I just don't, like I said, I just don't want to put the fire department in a precarious situation.
I know what we discussed, and I don't mean to interrupt if I am, but what we discussed was if I have to stretch a line in order to put it out, there's a really, really good chance the occupant or the owner is going to get a bill for that. A very excellent chance, actually. But if we're doing service deeds, like checking out your carbon monoxide detector, that's exactly the situation, and we discussed this yesterday. I'm never going to send a bill for somebody's carbon monoxide detector because I never want them to be scared to call us to ask, because that's when people die. And I can't have that.
Councilmember Schaefer.
The kind of counter side of that too is, and I don't want to get into the insured and uninsured, but I've always had a problem too with, at some point in time, I don't want us to subsidize insurance companies either, okay? So I've had a pretty close relationship with the fire department for probably the last 29 years now since I took my position in town, and we work together a lot, and I've been to a number of their meetings and try to follow them pretty close, and I don't recall hearing through town a grimace about the fire department either charging or not charging, so I mean, I don't want to create an issue here where there isn't one, and I would hope that as there's a concern that comes up about either having billed someone or not billing someone, that those decisions can always be amended. You can send somebody a bill, they can plead a case, and maybe it either gets reduced or it gets excused if it's on the edge. But, Quentin, I appreciate the logic that you use, and I agree with the logic that's been used, and I appreciate the concern that my council partner has in this and bringing it up, and I think it's a good discussion. But I too think that there's got to be some kind of a balance piece. I don't want to cast it so strong that we just, create a problem with people calling. I want to make sure if people are afraid or concerned that they call in their concern and that we get the proper people there, and then we can decide the charges. And I think that it's appropriately placed with you.
If you would discussion, Jim, and then Glenn.
Well, and I was making the point, you say if you stretch a hose, they're probably turning in an insurance claim and thus reaching their deductible. As somebody who's gone through several fire claims to my rentals, or calls, that's what it comes down to. Once that hose is stretched, they probably have an insurance claim, and they're not going to know they're even being charged.
Correct.
I know when I had my fire in my rental, I think the fire department sent it right to the fire department.
To the
I never
insurance
saw
company.
the bill.
Correct.
So that is a good, like you said, carbon monoxide detector, they're not going to have an insurance claim. Bar pizza, a little bit of smoke, no insurance claim.
Right.
But you're stretching a hose, I'll guarantee you they have an insurance claim.
And that's what these fees are based off of. And basically the reason why I changed a few of these things, and you can see the red line items, is to further clarify for that exact reason. Because before, and I'll say well, let's go to the line item where it says automatic fire alarm activation, $750 per call, but the asterisks that I would like to put in there, third call and after within a 72-hour period of time or 3 business days until functional. Because it happens where a mechanical failure happens with a head or some type of device that sets the activation off. And sometimes a property owner it might take a long time for that and they have to call us back and back and back. So that's what I'm trying to alleviate. Before, it didn't specify exactly what it was. So that's.
I would echo that. Excuse me, Mr. Mayor, but I was on the department many times, and it's amazing how fast those things can be fixed once you tell them after the third time.
Absolutely.
Either you fix it or we're going to start charging
Correct.
you. And it's amazing. Those things are fixed in 24
Absolutely.
hours or less.
Right.
So,
and it all boils down to whether the insurance company pays for the damages or the taxpayers pay for it. And we have fire insurance to cover these types of damages. So it makes sense that the insurance company should reimburse or pay for those costs. And the final thing I have is this, as the fire chief, what do you prefer? Do you prefer to have the discretion or rigid rules? I
prefer to have the discretion for that exact reason. It's a public relations thing for the whole city. I'm not a money-hungry, grubby guy that's going to start billing everybody because I think we need the revenue for the city. That's not what it's about. Like you had said at the Ways and Means yesterday, it's a user-based fee structure. A lot of it's always been there. It's never not been there. It's been there since even probably before I even became a firefighter. It was just the difference in perception and how it's used. It really probably should have been used more, but it wasn't. So, and now I'm trying to utilize it to the way the council wishes it to be.
So the system as it is isn't costing you a lot of problems.
It
as
isn't.
Far as
If you don't want me to bill, it really actually helps me because it makes less work for me.
We're not going there.
Well, and I'm guessing if somebody does not have insurance, you will know that at that point because, their house burned down will cause more undue hardship.
There's different scenarios that we never want to see, and we get called to people's worst day ever, period.
Correct.
Always, and that's what it is. And I like to say we're professionals in trying to be accommodating to the citizens we help protect.
And somebody being through one of those days, I understand that.
Right.
Any further discussion?
Yeah, I have just one quick clarification. Quentin, a lot of the calls that you guys have aren't necessarily fire-related. They're medical assist and other things, and at that point in time, a lot of times you're billing only to recover your disposables, correct?
Correct. Okay. A lot of times, this is the maximum I would charge within the city limits, and I don't remember which one of you said, a lot of times the average is about $400. I'm just trying to get payroll covered. I don't even charge the trucks out half the time. Now, if you flip the page over, it does say calls based on negligence can be billed out at this rate. There's a lot of red line items on that, and all I'm trying to do there is make it so I have one schedule to look at, and that's based on the Southwest West Central Fire Department mutual aid agreement. I only want one fee, one way to look up, so then people can't come back and say, well, you charged him this and not that. Everybody's got the flat rate.
one last comment. In the Ways and Means Committee, I think we talked about collection of the fees too, and the fact that in some cases people can't afford to pay the fees, and we have to make some kind of adjustment for that. And also, how do we collect the fees like we do for special assessments and so forth? There's improving the process where if we do have the fees, how do we collect them?
Sure.
And so those are things that the city is looking at.
Okay, any good discussion, any further discussion? Otherwise, I would
Yeah, I
entertain
make a motion to approve.
Motion by Craig,
Second?
seconded by Russ. Discussion? If not, we'll move to a vote. Close voting. And the motion does pass. We'll move then to agenda item number 16. I'll call on, this is the agenda 16, 17, and 18 are all related to different actions, the same question, all related to use issues on property at 1408 Floyd Wild Drive. So I'll call on Jason Anderson, Assistant City Engineer, and you can discuss all of those items at the same time.
Thank you, Mayor. So I'll start by giving a little background on the organization requesting the variance. Greater Minnesota Family Services is a nonprofit organization that provides help to at-risk children. They're licensed by the state of Minnesota as a mental health clinic. One of their programs is called SEED, and it helps 3 to 5-year-old kids with emotional and social development. They've been operating the program in Marshall for quite some time, first in a commercial building near downtown, and then starting this fall in a single-family home located at 1408 Floyd Wild Drive, which is located in R1 single-family residence district. According to Tom Belcher, the organization's CFO, they work with groups of kids, 8 to 10 kids at a time, in 3-hour sessions twice a day, and they employ 7 people in Marshall. We were informed that they run a similar program in many other cities throughout the state, and that other cities look at them and treat them from a zoning standpoint as a daycare. Each location is licensed as a satellite to their main office in Wilmer, but this does not involve any state inspections of their facilities here. According to our ordinance definition, this facility would be defined as a daycare, which is a permitted use in the R1 district. However, this use has other ordinance implications related to access and parking. Section 86205 prohibits vehicular access to non-residential uses across residential properties. This house is located hundreds of feet back from the street and is accessed through a recorded access easement which goes through other residential properties. Other sections require all required parking spaces and access drives to be paved. Neighbor concerns have been related to both snow removal and excessive traffic on the private drive. Greater Minnesota Family Services has indicated that they have contracted for snow removal services and that the kids are brought in on buses, which limits the amount of traffic on the road. So the first variance being requested is to allow for the passing through residential properties to reach a non-residential use. Staff recommended approval of this variance because the access easement already exists and the property cannot be used as permitted by the zoning ordinance without this easement. At the January 9th meeting, the Planning Commission recommended approval to the council for this variance. Would you like me to continue with the other variances?
No, we'll take these one at a time.
Okay.
So, thank you, Jason. Any comments from the Planning Commission? This was recommended, as Jason said, for approval by the Planning Commission. Questions the council has?
I just have a question, Jason, on the parking. It says that, you know, 1 parking space per employee plus 1 per 10 kids, which ends up being 8 total spaces. And they said you have 2 garages that accommodate 3, and in front of the house can accommodate another one, that's 4. Where, if they have 8 vehicles, where are they going to put the other 4?
Right, so what we're essentially saying is that they can park the vehicles in the garages or on the current paved space. We're permitting them, I believe, and this is the next variance down the line, I think the second one we're going to deal with, but we would permit them to have 3 vehicles on the gravel area, essentially. And however else they accommodate the vehicles is up to them, but the idea would be that they'd park them in the garage or on the existing driveway slab. But as I mentioned, I think that's the next variance that we're going to be acting on. So this one's just about the access.
My next question, maybe that's the next item. How do we enforce this?
It's a good question. It would be more complaint driven. So if we hear of concerns related to that, then we'll have to act on it.
On this variance, we talked about snow removal. This is a gravel driveway. Has the dust issue been brought up this summer when we go for 3 weeks without rain? And the neighbors with windows open are going to bring that complaint forward.
That may come up. I think that Greater Minnesota Family Services purchased this property in September, October, somewhere in there. So they probably haven't, the neighborhood probably hasn't dealt with that concern.
So is, you know, at that, how do we deal with it now so it doesn't come back?
So that's actually
That's be the third item.
Oh, that's the third one.
Yeah. So,
We're allowing the variance
and it
to
is
drive on.
complicated because there's 3 issues. This one is just allowing the access through.
Yes, allowing the access, because this access drive, and I don't know if we have a photo we can pull up, Kyle, but the access drive, it's kind of turned there.
But allowing the access through, shouldn't we deal with the dust issue first before we allow the access through?
Well, I think it's important to act on this first variance because it's really important to the use of the property, because this variance would be to even allow them to operate there.
Without access, there is no dust.
Right.
chicken or the egg.
But with, I see what you're saying, but with the dust, should we have the access?
It's impossible to turn it.
Rotate.
Can you rotate the image?
I can give him.
It's not gonna be like-
Yep. Okay, so,
The only, Mr. Mayor, the only other question I have is that according to the documentation that we've got in our council packets, according to your research, it says all locations with listed addresses are situated in commercial buildings. Do you know if they looked at all at any commercial buildings in Marshall, or did they just?
Mr. Belcher is here with Greater Minnesota Family
Kind
Services,
of
if
curious
you'd
why
like
you
to have
ended
him.
up in a residential area versus a commercial area that you have in other locations.
so if you choose to address that, I'd ask you to come up and use the microphone because we're on TV and so. And then if you'd just identify yourself too, so, thank you, welcome.
I'm Tom Belcher from Greater Minnesota Family Services. Yeah, we have been looking at other locations for quite some time. I know I was here in Marshall looking at, there was a building that used to house a martial arts facility. That would have cost $500,000 to, it would have cost at least a couple $100,000 to buy, and basically that was a barn. So we would have had to build it out and build rooms and bathrooms and electrical and all kinds of other things. So we actually have been looking for quite some time for another facility, but there was nothing cost effective that was zoned as a commercial. I mean, where we were now, we're simply outgrowing the space. We believe in the service to the children, and we were just basically busting at the seams.
So will you continue to look for a commercial space?
No, we purchased this building with the intent of
Staying there.
continuing to use it. And would you like me to address the road usage, or do that later, or do that not at all?
Yeah, we'll wait with that.
Okay.
You know, since
Okay.
there's
You wanna stay up there?
three
Sure,
separate
thank you.
issues. Let's first deal with the access issue. Are there any further questions on that prior to a motion? Glenn?
One of the things that, the reason it's the way it is that this was outside the city limits, and then a number of years ago, it was platted and brought into the city, and so there's not a street there, it's actually a private driveway that accesses those two houses, correct, at the end of it?
Correct.
And so it's a private easement, private driveway. And I did talk to the one owner whose property it goes across, and he was talking about the fact that he's got a certain number of acres of land, but actually he doesn't have that because the easement takes up a lot of his acres. And I went to talk to him because, you know, the neighbor is the one most affected by this, whether or not there's going to be gravel or not gravel, dust or not dust. And I wanted to know if the neighbor had any objections to this or if he thought it would be okay. And, you know, he said he's been living with these conditions for like 20 years or so, and he had no problems with what's being proposed here. He thought it would be fine and wouldn't cause any problems for his house. And his house is the one that's just north of that private driveway. And the easement, I believe, is across his property to get to the other two properties. And anyway, he seemed to think it was fine. He had no objections to it.
So it sounded like you were pretty close to making a motion there to allow the variance.
I'll second that.
May I add something to the, what we've got for a recommendation for a motion? After the planning commission meeting, we were talking as staff, and we should have added conditions to the variance, and those conditions being that the property remains to be used as it was defined by Mr. Belcher. So 8 to 10 kids, 3 to 5-year-old children, twice a day, those types of things. So we've added that to the recommendation to the council.
With that, I would entertain a motion.
I so move.
Motion by Craig, is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Jim. Discussion? If not, we'll move to a vote. Then we'll close voting. And that motion does pass. We'll move then to the next item, agenda item number 17. This is the variance that addresses the number of parking places. Jason, anything you want to add?
I don't think so. This is, like you mentioned, the variance for leaving the parking unpaved, the required unparking. And I think I already described how we came to the numbers that we came to, so I would just entertain questions if you have any.
Okay, open up for questions.
The only question I have is when a group home was built on North 4th Street, we required them to put in paved parking. So it's one of these, if we require it for one, we should almost require it for all. And they were built there about 5-6 years ago, as that green building sitting off of 4th Street there. And we required them to put their paved parking on. And I don't have a good answer for that, but if we're requiring it for one and it's in the city ordinance, we should almost keep that required for all, then, equal.
So based on that, Jason, with what Jim brought up, then, if the motion says that we approve this with the condition that as soon as conditions allow that the additional 3 vehicles that are being approved at this point are recommended to be parked outside the paved area, that area be paved when conditions provide, or conditions allow.
Yeah, if you so choose, I think we would state something to the effect of that required parking as defined by the ordinance is
Belcher, would that be understood?
I'm understanding what you're saying, yes.
So to clarify that, I think that we would probably be asking them to pave 3 or 4 parking stalls because they've already got
3 outside.
in the garage and on the existing slabs, and our ordinance allows for that. So we would be asking them to pave an additional, it's 3 or 4. We might have had a math error. It might be 4 stalls.
To come up with 8.
To come up with 8.
Required.
Yeah.
And I would make that motion.
And I would,
by Jim.
I would second it.
Seconded by Craig to allow the variance with the understanding that there are 8 paved parking places.
So in this case, we're not approving the variance then? Just to
Well, it's,
step in.
Once the parking lot is in, the variance would go away, correct? The way I understand it is you have a variance until,
Sure, so you're giving like
weather
a
permitting, they
temporary,
can put,
Yep.
obviously they can't put concrete in probably.
So basically, within the next year,
6 to 12 months, it should be done.
it should be done.
Does that make sense to you?
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
Yeah, I'd like to hear some comments from you.
you'll have to come to the microphone.
I guess my only question would be what, will the city be able to provide some sort of guidance as to what an acceptable paving method is?
yes, we would define parking space size and a required number of spaces.
Okay. And if, say, because I know not all of those 7 people there, they do work there, but they're not there all the time. Could there be some of those people work there for an hour or 2 a day, but then they are working in the children's homes? Is there some flexibility there, or how should we decide that?
I think we're being directed to enforce the ordinance required number of paved spots, so that would be
The
8.
the number of people that are working there on any given day, we would have to provide, the number of spots. Okay.
Ilya, you have some comments?
Thank you, Mayor Council. I just wanted to mention that variances cannot have time limit. So basically, if you're denying if you're approving for certain time, I don't think you can do that. It's in reality, if you deny the variance, no one is going to ask them to pave it right away anyway.
No.
So
what you're saying and help is we deny the variance and just have them pay
Enforcement discretion?
and use enforcement discretion.
right. So
I would remove my motion then and I make a motion to deny the variance and use enforcement discretion.
And is that?
I'll second that.
Okay. Everyone understands the motion that is on the table now?
Doing nothing with the variance itself as far as
That's correct.
Right.
no voting on that, so, okay. Yep.
Well, we'll have a vote on,
Vote on the motion.
Right.
That's right.
and Kyle, you can let me know when you're ready with the motion. Any other discussion on the motion? If not, we'll move to a vote.
Okay, yeah.
Motion is to deny.
Say I'm not clear on what we have on the screen. I understand that's motion, but what shows up on the screen?
What shows up on the screen will be the item, not the motion at this time.
All right. So it still is the motion to deny.
So yes is no.
Just Want to be clear.
Everybody.
Yes.
Has everybody voted? We'll close the voting. And that motion does pass. We'll move then to the next item. This is agenda item number 18, same property. This is the question of the access across the easement, whether it is required to be paved or not. Jason, anything to add?
I'll just add that it was staff's opinion that there was no justification for granting this easement because there was no practical, or variance, because there was no practical difficulties with paving the driveway. Cost is not considered a practical difficulty, but at the January 9th meeting, the Planning Commission, their motion was to grant the variance.
Glenn, any comments from the Planning Commission?
There was, I believe, some discussion that maybe, right now it's gravel, right? It's a gravel driveway.
Correct.
And I think at the Planning Commission, they talked about how much it would cost if we were to actually have to pave it. And was it in the neighborhood of like $30,000 or something?
Probably more.
More than that, yeah. And I think there's also some discussion, maybe using a different, like, big rocks or something to hold down the dust. Or wasn't there some suggestions as what we could maybe do, oiling the surface or whatever. But they also tried to look at other ways of holding down the dust for the neighborhood, because that might have been a concern. So those are some of the things that were talked about at the Planning Commission.
The other consideration is that this is on property that the applicant does not own.
Right.
Correct.
And the other piece of that is that the parking piece I understand, because I think that has something to do with the ability to have safety for snow removal and other things for people entering and exiting vehicles, and the stability of vehicles and having people not fall down and slip under the vehicles, to have a cleanable surface. The alleyway or the access way itself where the vehicles aren't parking, to me, I look at that's basically no different than our alleyways and having alleys in the community that don't have to be paved. And it's like having an alley access garage or to your home, and at that point in time, I think there again, it's the nuisance, avoiding the nuisance condition. So I'm not opposed to that piece of it. I was just concerned about the safety of having the parking spots paved, so.
Could you get the map back up on the screen? With regard to that private easement, you can see at the end of it, there are two residences. And it's my understanding that the two residents have a mutual agreement as to maintaining that easement. And so they're both, in a sense, responsible for maintaining it. And like I mentioned before, my concern was with the neighbors. How would they be affected by this? And the one neighbor I did talk to, like I said, he wasn't really concerned about it. He says it's been that way for 20-some years, and it hasn't caused him any problems.
And there again, Jason, it's based on complaint.
Right. We did receive some concerns from a neighbor out there about the traffic generated and the snow removal. Those two items in particular stand out to me were their major complaints.
Sure.
So, Jason, if we grant this variance, in a year from now, we get a complaint from the neighbor that says, can we go back and take this back?
I don't believe so. I mean, you've granted the variance.
Once we granted, it's granted, correct? Ilya? You say he didn't meet the conditions.
It's not a conditional use. It's a
Right, that's correct. If the variance is granted, it's granted, unless you attach a condition, and then if the condition is violated, then it can be revoked.
So if all of a sudden there ends up to be 10 cars a day versus 7 cars a day, that would be in violation of the variance.
Correct.
So then we would have the opportunity to.
Look at it again, yes.
And with that being said, I'm not worried about traffic. I know the neighbors have not said much, but you're going to have buses create more dust. It's to me, not even so much as snow as the dust. I don't, if we do a variance that they, with one of the conditions that they do control the dust, and there are ways to do that. So if there's complaints, then we can address it. There may not be complaints. But I don't think these folks realize now you add 10 more cars to this, and at a bus a couple times a day, you're going to create a lot more dust than having a resident there. And my issue, my concern is next July, we haven't had rain for 6 weeks, the dust. And, I have gravel in front of my shop, and the dust is terrible.
city staff have any recommendation as far as like crushed rock or oil or anything else that would help alleviate
we
the
talked
problem?
at the planning commission meeting about maybe requiring that they apply chemical to the gravel route, like calcium chloride or something, to kind of control the dust and firm up the gravel and control some of the potholing. That would be a cost to Greater Minnesota Family Services if you so chose to levy that type of condition.
But that could also be dealt with on a complaint or a nuisance basis, correct? I mean, we could deal with that as we needed. We wouldn't have to necessarily cast it.
If there is a condition for that, if there is no condition, then no.
Right.
I'd be willing to make a motion for the variance with the condition that the dust is controlled. Very vague, but you know, if there's complaints on dust, we can go back and address it. There may not be complaints.
So, motion by Jim, is there a second to that motion? Well, to grant the variance with the condition that
control the
dust is
dust.
controlled. Seconded by Glenn. Now, discussion on that motion. You want to speak? Sure. You can.
Thanks, Elliot.
I probably, maybe it doesn't make any difference, but for the planning folks, I did give some information about how we as an organization maintain our properties. I mean, there are people that own houses that don't take care of them. There are people that own houses, do a great job taking care of them.
And I have no doubt that you'll take care of your property because you're inspected by the state. It's just, the road is just a concern of the dust coming off the roads.
Totally understandable. I just wanted to pass along the information. I probably have enough copies. Here's a couple of pictures. I mean, granted, they're very nice pictures, but they're pictures
We can
of the
share, we
property
can share.
that we do own. And then the other thing I wanted to share.
Thank you.
You guys are the I just wanted to share as far as evidence. I mean, granted, you know, talking about the dust and take care of it, that's understandably a bit of a vague direction from the city council. But I did, in the packet that I gave you, I guess the important things are, one is to look how we do take care of our facilities, and then two is if you look on pages 2, 3, 4, and 5, or 2, 3, and 4 of the handout that I gave you, these are printouts that I took out of our accounting system for 2 sample properties that we have purchased in the last couple of years. These are the kinds of investments that we have spent on these places. The house on the bottom, we built a $150,000 rec center for the kids. Nobody said we had to do it, but the kids needed a place to go, and we needed a place for them to be able to get off some energy but not get into trouble. We do that. We've added all kinds of improvements to these places. So I just wanted to share with you some numbers on these pages of the kind of investments that we do when we have a property and what we do to maintain it. We're not here to make enemies of our neighbors. We don't want to harass them if we can go out. You know, and you can also see too, you know, you discussed previously that, you know, the maintenance of the driveway has sort of been a joint gentleman's agreement where you plow it this time, I'll plow it this time. We're taking care of the whole thing because it's too, I can't talk to our you know, the people that we've contracted to plow this place. You know, I don't have time to say, well, the neighbor did it last time, you do it next time, the neighbor did it. No, the neighbor's going to do it twice because you want to go on. We're taking care of the whole enchilada. If we need to spray, if we need to put oil down, we need to put some kind of special rock, whatever it is. I mean, we're here for the long haul. We want to be good neighbors. We want our the folks that are living there not to, you know, go up and say, oh, there's those yahoos with the kids climbing up the trees and all this other craziness. We're there to do a service, but we're also there to be part of the community. We also have a whole bunch of folks working in this school. I'm very familiar with this room. This is where we do all of our meetings once a month. Where we want to be part of the community and we don't want to be a burden. We don't want to cause hardships for anybody in the community.
Thank you. Thank you for your comments. We appreciate the work that you and your organization does. We're simply enforcing the ordinance, so thank you. Any other questions about the motion that is on the table?
Okay, and again, that's just clarification of what the motion is. Can you maybe read that back, Kyle?
Motion is to approve the condition, or approve a variance with the condition to control the dust.
And I guess my concern on that is we're asking one individual to potentially do some work on somebody else's land. And that is, to me, a difficulty. However, as you would have to control the dust on someone else's land because
they're doing the snow removal on somebody else's land.
Yeah, actually, I think with the easement, it gives them control. There's an expectation that they maintain it based on the fact that they have a legal recorded easement.
And the previous action prior to the, on agenda, the previous action did allow them, since it passed, access through that easement. So they have full use of that.
And I like the motion because I think it's not prescriptive that says you will do this or that you will just control the dust. If it's one day with a garden hose because it's the one day that it's driving, it's to maintain a low complaint or a complaint-free status.
Correct, and I agree with you, Craig. That's why I made the motion the way I did, is they may not have to do anything.
Right.
Len, do you have a comment?
I just want to make sure we're clear on the motion here. By ordinance, they're required to pave it. And what we're saying, we're giving them a variance so they don't have to pave it. But they still have to control the dust on it. So that's the complete motion. I just wanted to make sure we're all straight on that.
They have to control the dust when somebody complains, or do they just
They just should not get, they should just control the dust.
control the dust, period?
Other discussion on the motion? Now we'll move to a vote on that motion. Close voting. And the motion does pass. Moving on then, thank you and thanks. We'll move then to agenda item number 19. Actually, agenda item number 19 and agenda item number 20 are related, and both are introductions of ordinances. So, Jason, you can briefly explain both, recognizing that the ordinance itself will be discussed in detail after it's introduced at the next regular meeting.
Thank you. At the November 27th meeting, Ty Brower presented a proposal for public archery range to the council, and I believe the council reacted favorably to the discussion. So this item is to try to accommodate that use based on what was presented to the council. The proposed location is currently zoned I-2, which does not permit archery ranges. So considering that, and in Marshall, archery ranges are only permitted in B3, which is most likely for indoor archery. Considering that the intent is for the archery range to become a public park space operated by community services, and public parks are zoned agricultural in Marshall, we've kind of put this process into a three-step process to allow for archery. So this is the first item in that, which would be an ordinance amending the ag district to allow for archery ranges as a conditional use. This has gone through Planning Commission and L&O, and both were recommended approval.
Okay. Thank you, Jason. Any questions?
I move the introduction of the ordinance amending the, to permit the archery range and to call for a public hearing.
Second that.
Motion by Craig, seconded by Jim. Discussion on that motion? Now we'll move to a vote. Close the voting. Motion does pass. The next item then will be the introduction of the ordinance to rezone. Again, the same issue, same property.
I move the introduction of the ordinance for requesting for map amendment to rezone.
Motion by Craig, seconded by John. Discussion? Now we'll move to a vote. Opposed, voting. Motion passes. We'll move then to agenda item number 21. This is also an introduction. This is an introduction of the ordinance amendment to section 62-2, the ice and snow, and call for a public hearing. Once again, Jason.
Thank you. City ordinance currently regulates snow and ice removal from public sidewalks, requires owners of adjacent properties to have snow and ice removed within 24 hours, and permits the city to have it abated and assessed back to the adjacent property owner if the bill is not paid for. However, snow on private streets is not addressed, despite it being a health and safety hazard and the city receiving numerous complaints. We reviewed state statute as a staff, and the statutes give the city the authority to have snow removed from public sidewalks and private properties, including private streets. Therefore, the ordinance section was revised and put in front of you today to add private streets. Additionally, we made a few other changes to that ordinance to reflect how we actually enforce the ordinance. At the meeting on January 18th, the L&O committee voted to recommend to council the approval of this ordinance.
Okay. Thank you. Questions for Jason?
I have a question, a couple questions. I think that we need to clarify what a private street is before this is approved. You know, we just talked, that gentleman lives at the end of a private street. As I went to my insurance agent, Midwest Insurance sits at the end of a private street. Just throwing private streets out there, I think we need to sit down and clarify that more broadly. Is it private residential streets? You know, past my shop, there's a private street. We have a lot of private streets in Marshall. You call them easements, I think that needs to be clarified more clearly before this comes forward. Where are we going to go? I have a problem when government starts to go on to private entity. Always have, because that's why it's private. But I understand the need for it. I just think that needs to be more clarified. The other issue I have is the private property within 12 hours after such a snowstorm. There's cases where the city hasn't even done pushing snow after 12 hours. I think that should be looked at before it comes to public hearing for a longer term. And I'm not saying that the city's doing anything wrong. When we got that snow in April, there was people still pushing snow 36 hours later. We need to take a look at the realistic time frame and maybe push that out farther too. Older folks hire people to push their snow, and there's times we're pushing snow 2 days later if we get a lot of snow. So they have an unrealistic time frame. That just doesn't make sense.
Could I just mention a few things, and you talked about it here too, the fact that we're not going to require the private citizens to do any more than the city is doing. And in some situations, the city can't get out there and get it done in 12 hours. So the city, again, we'll be doing a lot of this on a complaint basis, and we're not going to require anything more of private citizens than we do of the city itself. I think that was your point.
That's correct. We added a sentence in the ordinance that states that.
And one more thing I just wanted to point out is that, right now, if people don't control the weeds on their property or snow and so forth, we use special assessments to collect on it. And that's what we're going to be doing in a situation like this too. Only we're also going to apply it to private streets. And so we'll collect it like we do other types of special assessments. The third thing, and I do agree, it would be good somewhere in the ordinance to have a definition as to what private streets actually means. And Iliad maybe wants to come up here because we did have that discussion. What's the difference between a private easement and a private street or a private road? And I think you feel that there's distinctions, and maybe those distinctions should be made clear in an ordinance.
Well, the easement is the recorded easement usually, so it's clearly stated in the plat that it is an easement, not a street. The private street can be still shown and called so in the plat. But in some cases, it's not called anywhere. It's just, I don't know if there is a special definition in the ordinance. We can check on that thing and we can update it if we need to. But usually it's like, we can say that we know what it is when we see it. So we can certainly
Can I round up the discussion a little bit too. You know, statute actually gives the city authority to require sidewalks on private property and walkways cleared because they're a health and safety hazard. We talked about that a little bit, and we chose not to go that far.
But the ordinance reads just health and safety hazards, so who determines if is a foot of snow a health and safety hazard or is an act of God? That'd be your answer.
If it's left for 2 days, it could become a health and safety hazard. The fact that it fell is an act of God. How you deal with it becomes the human problem. So it's my point with this is, and maybe just some clarity, because we have two things. One, as we pass statute, rule, or ordinance, we do it to the lowest common denominator, okay? And then hopefully we use, I would like to say common sense, but there's no such thing. It's wisdom and experience and knowledge. And I would hope that we would use that discretion as we apply this. So in the thought of a private street, and like your shop, if you're the only one on it, it's your driveway. And it's up to you. If it's you and your employees, that I think is yours. But I can think of other settings where there are private streets where there's a number of individuals living there that require the access, ingress, and egress on that private street, and that becomes an issue. That's at that point no different than a public street, and that's where I hope that with our staff and how we enforce these, we're going to apply that rationale of wisdom, knowledge, and experience.
And I get that, Craig, and at this day and age, I think we have a staff that does. 10 years down the road, somebody may look at this ordinance and they may not. So I want to try to make this ordinance, and I understand the need for the ordinance. I just think that needs to be refined more. What is a private street? What is the requirement before we do this? It's to save headaches later on of neighbors complaining or somebody being a pain in the butt.
I think at times, and I don't know where the balance is, and I know there's people in here, in the room here that are better educated on these far than I am, but at a point in time, we can make the rules too specific and too definitive to where they don't apply. And then we can make them too general where we don't give any guidance for our staff to do the work. So that's the balancing act. But again, I think it gets to the comment you made about public safety or health and welfare. And I think, again, I'm guessing that we're not going to go looking for these like we do with any of it. It's going to be no different. It's going to be based on the action or inaction of the property owner.
And at this point, I agree, we probably are not going to go looking for them, but that can change in 10 years.
Well, sure it can, but at that point in time, there's still a council that's going to be going in, and they can always appeal or change that ordinance.
Hopefully, yes.
We can fix our mistakes. That's the beauty of this business. We can come back in 2 weeks and fix our mistakes.
I'm just wondering if we could direct staff to go and look into this matter as to a definition of private street, and maybe it could work it all out and bring it to the hearing, and we can think about including that as part of the ordinance.
Certainly.
That was going to be my recommendation as well. Let's see if we can come up with a definition and bring it back to the public hearing.
So certainly staff has heard that input. The action before us is to call for a public hearing.
I would make the motion to call for that public hearing.
I'll second that.
Motion by Jim, seconded by Craig. Discussion?
Thanks, Ilya.
If not, we'll move to a vote. We'll close the voting. The motion does pass. Move then to agenda item number 22. This is the Highway 23 Saratoga Street intersection improvement. We have a change order to consider, as well as the final pay request. Dennis?
Thank you, Mayor and Council. Just one clarification. It is change order number 4 and pay request number 11. So, yeah, we have not been inundated with change orders on this project. Change order number 4 would be the request to reduce the final pay by $42,000. That's a negotiated settlement amount with the contractor and myself based upon input from engineering consultant and the local engineering staff, meeting with contractor and subcontractors. This, you can see the final pay request is for $103,000. And it is from that amount that has been negotiated, the pay request. Change order would be to reduce that final payment by a $42,000 amount. That would be the liquidated damages because the project was not completed on time, so that the final pay of $61,205.13, that would be the 11th payment.
And if you do the math on it, ultimately, the project came in $109,000 under budget, which is 2.24% less than was bid. And so it'd be the recommendation. Negative change order 42,000, approved final pay of 61.
So Dennis, what you're saying is change order good.
Right.
Change order good, yes.
Change order good.
Dennis and Jason and Glenn, who's not here, and Sharon, thank all of you, because I know there was some real serious negotiations that went into this, so thank you for your work.
We're arranging some pre-settlement mediation, but ultimately we got this settled without incurring additional mediation fees and no additional legal fees, unfortunately, but.
We'll give you a Christmas card.
And the project
The project came in great, yeah.
Good.
Yes.
Questions?
The only question I have, and this is just more of an informational question, we have these $1,500 per day penalties in.
Yes.
Are they normally negotiated if they run, because this one ran quite a ways over. I mean, we I don't want to say gave up a lot, because I know legal fees, sometimes you just settle because legal fees eat it up.
Yes.
But how hard are those to, obviously enforceable, but.
And ultimately, that was the question, how hard do you push for, how many days? They were originally cut in half, and then we basically threw in the mediation and legal fees that would have been incurred to enforce any amount of liquidated damages.
And Dennis, you can correct this, but you can have the damages in the contract, but in order to enforce that, you also need to show that there was a loss that was incurred by the city.
Correct.
Because of the delay.
Yes.
So that gets the sticky part.
Thank you. I would make the motion, if discussion's on, make the motion to accept the change order or to accept the final payment.
Motion by Jim.
Second.
Seconded by Russ. Discussion?
I just want to add that the original bridge supplier for this project went out of business. It created a delay for the construction company. We, in turn, had delays based on that incurred additional engineering and consulting fees. So that was the sticking points as well. So I was glad that the attorney was able to come to settlement.
Good.
We always appreciate it when we keep the attorney fees down.
Any other discussion on the motion? If not, we'll move to a vote. We'll close voting. And the motion does pass. Move then to agenda item number 23, the special assessments on tax forfeited property, the location 620 West Main Street. Annette from Finance.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. On May 16, 2018, the bare lot located at 620 West Main forfeited to the state of Minnesota. Along with unpaid taxes are just over $19,000 of unpaid city special assessments. Minnesota State Statute 429 gives the city the authority to reassess them once the property is returned to private ownership. The reason it's brought to you guys today is to maybe give a little bit of direction as to how we want to handle it. There's 3 different options we can take. We can do nothing and wait for it to become private or to be sold by the state of Minnesota. We can plan to reassess it once it is sold, and then not to reassess would be the third option. I do have E.J. Moberg, the Lyon County Auditor Treasurer, here if you guys have any questions for the forfeiture process that he could hopefully answer. I just want to add that our end game that we want is to get this back on the tax roll because it has not generated any revenue for any of the taxing jurisdictions for the last 5 years, I believe it has been. So just looking for a little bit of direction as to kind of how we want to handle it.
So just a bit more background. This is the property that was, there was a home that was severely damaged in the July windstorm of
2011.
2011, and the assessment, or is really the cost that was incurred by the city to remove the structure.
So it was not tree removal for $10,000.
I think there was a tree involved.
The tree removed itself and damaged the house.
Well, it says tree.
It's just little notes.
I figured that was for the house, but
Had to remove the tree
glad that
from
was
the house.
verified.
Could I ask a question here then? So as far as the council is concerned, do we wait and take formal action once it's returned to private ownership, or do we make a motion tonight saying that it will be reassessed and take effect when it returns to private ownership? What exactly do we do?
I know that when people inquire at Lyon County about the property, they are directed kind of back to the city, letting them know there are assessments that can be reassessed. So we have had, a few questions on whether or not we plan to reassess that, because it's kind of a turning point for a lot of people that may be interested in the property. Because the bare lot, I can tell you, is not going to be worth the $19,000 on top of what they buy it for.
Sharon, and then Craig.
I believe that the auditor treasurer is looking at auctioning this off with the initial sales price of $3,000. Prospective buyers would likely not bid on that property unless there is certainty that the special assessments were forgiven, and not for a short term, but for the long term. And so if the city council does not forgive the special assessments, it's likely there would not be a sale. The property would remain in trust, held in title by the state of Minnesota and caretaken by Lyon County. One of the things that I think we do have to be careful about is forgiving of special assessments. And when talking to the auditor treasurer and what other communities do, they typically take these on a case-by-case basis. If the city council was going to approve this forgiveness of a special assessment, we would want to indicate strongly that this is not setting precedent and that we will be taking these on a case-by-case basis.
Craig?
Mr. Mayor, one of the questions that I have is, I know in the past in some other communities dealing with properties that either had special assessment or liens, judgments, environmental liens, et cetera, there's typically an agreement. In this case, could we do an agreement, EJ, with the county based on the sale? I mean, I'm guessing the county has a tax interest in this too that would be recovered on the sale of the property. And can we work out a ratio that includes partial payment based on the sale, that we recover part of the assessment based on whatever the auction price is, but that the actual sale price of the property would be what the auction bid would be?
And I believe it is mandated by state as to how the proceeds of the sale are allocated out. There are things that take precedence, and then if there are any remainders, it does get.
So what's the order of feeding on this site, EJ? Is there, obviously there's an order.
So I'll call forward EJ Moberg, Lyon County Auditor.
Thank you. So the order would be, after everything is settled, we will try to pay out any specials that are still on it. So if they still have specials, it may be good for you if you leave them on through that period.
Specials go first? We can do specials first, yes, and then after specials, then it gets distributed 40% to the county, 40% to the school, 20% to the city of any remainder. What I would not do, or what I would not recommend for any taxing body, to say today that you're going to absolutely put those back on, because that could mean we have to actually adjust the price. So instead of listing it for hypothetically $3,000, we'd have to list it for $22,000 plus dollars, or whatever that number is. The special assessments were canceled at the time of forfeiture. You do have the right of reinstatement. What a lot of cities will do is take them on a case-by-case basis and want to talk to prospective buyers on what the plans are for the property. If it's going to be something that, it's just going to be a lot that they hold on to, they sometimes will say, the council would likely or potentially keep that on. If it's something where it's going to be some kind of economic development or something else that will enhance the tax value of the property, then they sometimes walk away. It also depends on what else is out there. One of your assessments may be for a street assessment. I believe it is in this case. If you had bonded debt on that street assessment, then some cities will say, well, no, we want to leave that part on there. The property itself will be appraised higher than what we try to sell it for.
Right now, I believe the assessor's office has it at $14,600, if memory serves, as what the appraised value would be of that lot. That is what it would stay, even if we sell it for less. I'm trying to put it at a price where we get hopefully multiple bidders, and if they want to pay more, that's great. We had a sale a year ago of January, so a year ago from now, or ago. We had 9 properties on the sale. 6 of them had multiple bidders. In total for the 9 properties, we had about $9,800 as our base price to start bids, and we ended up taking in over $38,000 on the sale. So we're trying to set it low enough that we try to get hopefully multiple bidders there. Right now there is just a garage on this property, which does have some of the building value. I believe the property value itself, the assessors are saying, is about $12,000 with $2,600 for the building. It all depends on what the county board actually approves. My recommendation at this point, I intend to go to them on February 5th to set a sale date, which will be sometime in March. I don't know an exact date yet, or don't even have a recommendation yet. But I am leaning towards suggesting the $3,000 to again put it at a price that makes sense, that we hopefully have multiple bidders on site, and it hopefully goes for more. But if not, it's something that we can at least get back on the tax rolls. And that was correct in that this property has delinquent taxes dating back to 2012. In total at this point, there's over $25,000 that was canceled at forfeiture between taxes, special assessments, penalties, interest, and cost.
Thank you, EJ.
So right now we have over 19,000 in special assessments.
Correct.
And the property's worth maybe 14,000 or so, or on the market, or?
That's what the assessors are appraising it at.
So if somebody paid $3,000 for it and then also got $10,000 assessment, they're actually paying $13,000 for it then, if they got $3,000 cash plus the assessments. So if we reduce the assessments by 50% and left $10,000 on there, that'd be a possibility too, right? Where the city would end up with $10,000 in special assessments.
Right.
And Dennis, maybe, according to state statute, it says upon notice and hearing as provided by the original assessment. Does that mean we have to go through the whole process again, or was our first process? So that would be another thought.
On process and hearing, it sounds to me like you might need
have to do the whole thing starting over again
to set what amount you may want to keep in place.
On this property, as you talk value just now, what is it zoned as?
It's residential.
Is it zoned R1?
So the other question, I mean, it has, couple questions. One is when we did the demo work, and part of that was on threat to public health and welfare because it was an unsafe condition. So what funds did we use for that? Just general ad valorem?
Right.
Okay. So part of that, I mean, we were doing that to abate a nuisance, which means we can attach to the property. Did we leave the water and sewer utility established on the lot? Were they stubbed up within the curb, or is that something that somebody that develops lot's going to have to pay to reconnect? Is there a curb stop there? Is there still an active sewer service there? Can they tie back into that without paying reconnect? I mean, is there a value there?
There should be.
I would believe that there are still services to
So
the
there's
property,
some
but we would
value
have to
added
look
to the
into that.
property that it has existing utility that you wouldn't have to re-up for that. What are those connection fees? They're fairly significant.
MMU no longer charges a fee to connect. It's just whatever your cost of doing so is. We have a sanitary sewer connection fee, off the top of my head, $300 or $400 maybe.
Okay, so it's fair. That's not real significant. But there's no street cuts, which is good because that's a brand new street. Okay. I mean, I want the property to sell, but at the same point, I'd like to keep a dog in that. I think I'd be okay with a ratio dog because I don't want to take, you know, the school has in this with back taxes, the county has back taxes. We have the assessment in there of cleaning the property up, but part of that was just abating a nuisance. So I mean, it is what it is. The property owner was at no fault of their own, but the act of God with the storm, and fortunately they were uninsured and had to vacate the property. So, I mean, it's not like this was done by a negligent action.
They were insured. Their insurance was taken by a storm restoration company. That is the correct statement. They
right.
were
So
insured.
this is a true hardship.
Yep.
Yeah.
And it was taken, remember they
Yep,
put the blue
that's
tarp
right.
with their name on the roof?
Yep, that's right.
but it was taken by a storm restoration company.
Yep.
Is the difference here between our special assessment for the tree removal and other things different than the school district and the county taxes? Because ours is an actual out-of-pocket expenditures.
Right, no, I get that.
And theirs isn't, so.
Well, I guess what I was getting at is, as we look at the zoning of this, more than likely this would not be a residential property again. That's not an area you're gonna put a $200,000 house. If
I think we should sell to the county for parking lot.
Well, I was gonna say, is this something, well, that discussion has come up. Is
Yeah, I
this
know
something
that.
that the county
giggle.
look at, or is this something before you guys list it for selling? Maybe we look at rezoning for a shop or a store or some, another use. This, I'd really, really be surprised if somebody put a new house in this neighborhood.
You're in a whistle,
That's a
you're in a whistle
that's a bad
zone.
neighborhood, but it's,
Oh, but you're in a whistle zone.
Doesn't the county need some parking space?
you heard that 4 times.
Is the county interested? No idea?
I'm not part of those discussions. I believe the parcel was looked at in the past as a possibility, because we've known for a few years this was gonna come up.
So I know it's been a conversation.
I know there was a zoning issue. I will also say that there have been multiple parties interested already in the parcel, and we haven't listed it or even noted it's for sale yet. But we have been getting inquiries from people that do have supposed
Is the
interest in
garage in
buying.
fairly good shape?
I can't picture it. The question, Mr. Mayor, and Sharon probably can help, and Dennis, but, I mean, can we close this by simply saying that, depending on the buyer, we'll negotiate that it's not an absolute, we're leaving it on, but that we would want to have the conversation with the purchaser about the assessment?
The only
Back to
problem,
your use.
yeah, the only problem with that, Craig, is that somebody who buys this, you're thinking, well, we're gonna get hooked for $19,000.
Well, yeah, I get that.
So I think, I like Glenn's idea of cutting it, I know it makes your heart, but cutting it in half. I did like that idea a lot. Say, okay, we want half of our assessments.
Well, the advantage of that is that there's a known number.
There's a known number. It's a low enough number that I think you guys will still get offers, because the garage itself is probably worth $20,000. I don't know what kind of shape it is, but you have a spot there. I like Glenn's idea.
Did you make a motion?
I'll make a motion that we cut, how do you make that motion? That we collect 50% of the assessments upon sale of the property.
And I just want to clarify that even though we're cutting it in half, because they really no longer exist right now until it becomes private ownership again, and that's when we would
Correct.
reassess it. So this is just kind of, I think, giving more direction as to if we were to get inquiries,
Can
that
we-
would be our plan.
Can we get cute with that?
The discussion, is there a second to that motion? Motion by him. I'll second. Seconded by Glenn, now discussion.
Can we get cute with that motion and say that not to exceed 50% of the assessment?
I would add that to- I would
Because we
add that
haven't
to
put
my-
it on yet.
Yes.
I also just have a question of, so let's just say we list it for the hypothetical $3,000, we get multiple bidders and they pay $10,000 for the property. Are you talking that most of that money is gonna come back to you as part of the
Correct.
assessment that will go towards it, or are you talking on top of?
No.
Okay.
No,
No.
that-
Just
We'll
just for
take out of that,
clarity.
yeah.
Thank
So
you.
if it was $10,000, my intention, the motion is we get, I think the half is 9,000 and some would be, come back to the city and you guys would divvy up the other 42 cents.
Are you clarifying your motion?
I am, yes. That it is 50% of the assessments.
Maximum.
Up to 50% of the mission.
And that is okay with your second? Yes, that's fine. Okay. And Kyle, I can't see you, but you have that. Other discussion on that motion? If not, we'll move to a vote. Close the voting. Motion passes. Agenda item number 24. Agenda item number 24 is the wastewater treatment improvements. Before us is the action to approve the plans and specifications and authorize the advertisement for the bids. Jason?
I think Bob Van Moore is here. We'll let Bob take this one.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. Last council meeting, we had Bolton and Mink here and did a PowerPoint of the project and kind of went over costs and schedules and things like that. Tonight, we're asking for permission to advertise for bids for that project. Their intention is January 28th, putting bids out for advertisement and receiving bids February 28th.
Okay. Questions?
I move approval.
Second.
Motion by Craig, seconded by John. Discussion? Now we'll move to a vote.
Thank you.
We'll close the voting. And that motion passes. Agenda item number 25, consider the request, the authorization to request proposals for removal of hazardous materials and miscellaneous debris from the Marshall Hotel. Jason?
Thank you, Mayor. This project includes the removal and disposal of all hazardous building materials and miscellaneous debris within the Marshall Hotel property at 326 West Main. The removal and disposal of all hazardous materials and miscellaneous debris is necessary whether the hotel is renovated or demolished. RFPs would be received on February 19th with anticipated award on February 26th. Project completion within 60 days.
Questions?
Only question I have is, as we get this bid and as we work at possibly selling this, will this be included into the sale price of this hotel to recover some of the costs? It is a savings to the, if somebody would purchase the hotel.
Hopefully we get enough for it to cover the cost
That's
of
what
removing.
I'm getting at, yes.
I think Jason, your point though was you're going to have those costs regardless.
Right.
If you don't sell it, you tear it down. You still
Yeah, we
got it.
still got to take all this out of there. It doesn't matter.
Negative value to this property.
Yep. It's kind of like the old high school property where the Heritage Point is. We had to spend as much money cleaning it as we did taking it down.
So we're increasing the value of it by cleaning it to hopefully recover some of the costs.
Exactly.
Okay, now word it
We're
that way.
polishing the truck before we haul it to the salvage yard.
That's not usually what you tell me on the phone, Craig, but I'll make this motion.
Motion by Jim, is there a second?
I'll second.
Seconded by John.
I
Discussion?
have one thing to add, Mayor. On the request for proposal, I discussed this with Jason. There is the requirement that the contractor, whoever's awarded it, receives permits prior to the demolition.
Yep.
And so we've asked to change it. You're not demolishing the building. It's prior to the removal and disposal of that stuff. So there's one minor correction within that.
I used my common sense on that one.
There's no such thing.
Other discussion on the motion?
There's no such in common.
If not, we'll move to a vote.
I was told that's education and experience.
Close the voting. That motion does pass. Agenda item number 26, consider the resolution authorizing the preparation of the report on the improvement of East Lion Street reconstruction and Huron Road, Superior Road reconstruction. Jason?
Thank you, Mayor. You've got some resolutions for initiation of, what's the first step in initiation of a special assessment procedure for our projects. This is the ordering of feasibility reports on Project Z69, East Lion Street reconstruction, which is a paving of East Lion from the new J-turn project out past Vast driveway. The other project is Z74, Huron Road, Superior Road reconstruction project. Right now, we will complete that report as if it's a complete reconstruction of street and utilities. All improvements are proposed to be assessed according to current policy.
So Jason, that is actually my question is on both of these projects, I think we don't want to get too far into these projects unless we have, some acknowledgement from the properties to be assessed that there's some agreement on this. For example, actually on both of them, is there the desire on the property towards Vast that they want that paved and we'll pay for it?
I think Steve Klein called me today, so I think if we do this, I think it'd be very good to have a conversation with him.
And the other project, is really based on past reports and our experience last year. That project was driven primarily for the upgrading of the utilities and the water main. So one of the considerations is that project limited to the cut for replacing the water main, and that is a utility cost then. So that would be something different than the complete reconstruction that perhaps would be appealed based on our current policy.
Yes, we're aware of that, and I suppose what we could do is write the report for both ways, as if it were a utility reconstruction only or a complete reconstruction. We could have it for both options.
Mr. Mayor, Steve Klein also called me today too, and one of the things that he mentioned, he said this was the first he had heard about it. So I don't know. He said the only reason he heard about it today is because we had city staff out there putting some flags in or something, and so.
I'm pretty sure our staff talked to him last year in the field as well.
He did bring up a good comment. He said, if the city was considering doing this, why didn't they possibly do it last year with the J-turn and everything else?
I can speak to that. We tried. MnDOT was not interested in having us participate with them in that project, and we thought it best with that project being, it would have ended up being at the same time if we would have pursued our project, and we didn't want to have two separate contractors potentially trying to play in the same sandbox. So,
well,
I guess I would just
clarified with
yeah.
the property.
With the property owners.
And that's what I told Steve Klein too, that MnDOT wasn't going to work with us well, so it'd be good if you called them. I did tell them that myself, I remember that conversation. My only concern as we go forward with these is we do have these issues also hanging out there about assessments in commercial properties.
yes, and I just want to also add that this is just ordering the feasibility report. There's still plans to be ordered and public hearings to be had, so this is just the first step.
What is the financial impact of a feasibility report?
What do you mean by that? Could you
What's the
clarify?
cost?
We write it internally.
So there's no cost per se to, I mean, there's a labor cost, staff cost.
Staff time to put it together.
Yeah.
It's part of our workflow.
Correct.
Yep, thank you.
Okay, with that, is there any other input? Not the, I'd
I
entertain
move the
motion.
Resolution. Second.
Motion by Craig, seconded by Russ. Discussion? If not, we'll move to a vote. Close the voting. The motion does pass. Agenda item number 27, consider the application for on-sale liquor license for SMSU for a Ducks Unlimited event, February 23rd, 2019. Questions on this? Is there a motion?
So move.
Second. Motion by Russ, seconded by Jim. Discussion? If not, we'll move to a vote. Close the voting. Oh, I'm sorry.
Reopen the voting.
I abstained anyway, so.
Can you just handle that?
Voting has been reopened.
Well, you guys don't know what my vote is.
So we'll vote again.
We'll change it then.
Now can we close voting? Voting is closed. Motion passes. We'll note one abstention. Which then brings us to agenda item number 28, Commission Board Liaison Reports. I'm going to pass this evening. Craig?
Mr. Mayor, the radio board met this afternoon. I did not attend, but I'm glad to say that our fine electronics and I guess technology gentleman has attended his first meeting, so we're in really good hands for a lot of those meetings that I'm not able to make. So Alex Peterson was there, and if we have any questions, we can grill him at a later time. But other than that, none of mine others have met. The Airport Commission was deferred, so.
When?
Items acted on by the Planning Commission were also put forward on tonight's agenda, and we've acted on those. The Housing Commission usually meets the second Monday of each month, but we had problems with scheduling, and so the Housing Commission will meet this coming Monday. And that's it.
John?
EDA did meet last week, and part of the discussion was regards to the house that was on our agenda tonight and movement of that. MMU had their meeting last night and was able to attend that. They did, I guess one of the topics of discussion is some funds they've been reserving in anticipation of a settlement between XL and some other businesses that are involved in the transmission costs, that there may be some refunding from MMU back to XL. They've reserved those. They've determined that the funds that they have are more than sufficient to cover what is probably going to be determined in the settlement, and so they're basically moving those funds into a separate account that is used to help adjust the cost. Trying to think of the term right now. Basically the cost factor that gets put in on the utilities as prices fluctuate, and we have a given rate. So they'll be using that fund to help mitigate that and even that out. So.
Thank you, John. Russ?
I attended my first Marshall-Line County Library Board meeting with the death of Bill Cole. Pam Gladys was elected the president, and Eric DeRote was elected vice president. They still have an opening of one member, or one opening on the board yet, in addition to the two they welcomed, and plus myself. They had an old business and a budget update at the 2019 telephone costs, and they straightened this out with the city. The city was actually paying it, and they didn't have it in their budget, but now they've got it worked out, so they've got enough funds in their budget to cover it, so they're not too concerned about it, but going forward, that will be corrected. As we all read, probably Administrator Hansen's email, hopefully, our local library is one of selected out of 50 throughout the United States to partake in the American Creed community conversation. So that was exciting news for them, and they're gonna, the first one I believe is gonna be on January 24th. And I apologize because I just got this email late this afternoon from Michelle, and the boards of all 12 regions have now endorsed an increase of at least $3 million in regional library basic support through the state of Minnesota from state aid for Plum Creek. They said there, for those of you who are unfamiliar with the Plum Creek budget, we now receive about 72% of the state funding that we received in 2009. So it was a learning experience in the library board. So that was the other board that I had was the CVB board. And again, they're basically about the same. They have changed their meeting dates, and I told Kyle about that. So they now meet on the third Wednesday of the month instead of the Thursday. So we talked about they're redoing their bylaws, and they want to wait until they complete their audit, until the bylaw, and so to work on the bylaws because they want to get their audit completed first. So it's just a status. I guess the bylaws have been an ongoing process that have been taking place for a while. Lauren gave us an update on happening events at the Red Baron Arena. They've scheduled about 9 events from March, April, and May. They have another wedding tentatively booked in September, which would make 3 weddings out there for this year. And I believe I got to remember the date. I believe this weekend they're anticipating 800 to 900 kids out there for the speech spectacular. So in town, I should say. So weather permitting, it'll be interesting if they all end up. But yeah, it was a good meeting. But yeah, so that's all I have on those.
Very good. Thank you, Russ. Jim?
The Transportation Committee met. They are working at creating new routes from surrounding communities into Marshall. And then we work with Community Services on a pass for kids this summer. In the past, we've participated in that. We're working with Community Services to do that again.
Very good. We'll move then to council member individual items. Jim, let's start on your end.
The only thing I have is, and this is the citizens, if anybody's watching, with the snow removal going on, be careful on snow plows. And I say that because I was pushing snow the other day and I had somebody just about to smog. A big truck was sorely light on and they just went buzzing by. Those trucks are big. My truck is big. Our plows are big. We need to yield our right of way to the plows they're doing us a service. So that's good. Russ?
Well, I brought up last month about the city staff clearing around hydrants, and I have to thank them because I think they did either. I don't know if Park and Rec did it or Community Services or
Marshall Municipal Utilities staff.
Okay, they did a great job because within a matter of a couple of days, the hydrants that I looked at, they were all cleared. So, and again, I echo what Jim said. You know, we've had all this lovely snow, and it always happens on a Friday. But you know, those plows and those guys and the city staff are out there on Saturday plowing the streets for us, so they've done a great job. So I just want to commend them for that. The other thing I did is I had the opportunity to tour Bob Van Moore. I didn't call him or anything else. He just invited. I just went out there and he gave me a tour of wastewater, and that was an eye-opening experience for me. And I would recommend that if none of the council members have done it, it was very worthwhile for me just to be a new council members and to see what's being done out there.
Sneak out there in the fall and watch the drag line.
Yep. That's all I have.
Okay, John?
About the only thing, just adding on to what Russ talked about, cleaning the hydrants, that was done by MMU. They actually had to bring out some heavier equipment to chip it loose, so it was a task. So.
Craig?
Yeah, thanks. And even adding on to that, I know that, I'm not sure which department, I'm sure it was all the departments together, but I noticed they were also going around and bucking out the ADA ramps around town that had problems because, you know, the December snow that we got was warm and wet. And so that all iced up, and then we've had the warmer weather, so everything turned into some pretty good ice bricks, as we all know. And I just appreciate the way that the city really does pay good attention to citizens and our employees and departments to the fact that we are a pretty heavy pedestrian community, and some of them are using special conveyance vehicles to do that, you know, for pedestrian movement, and I really appreciate people paying attention to their sidewalks. I think we've had pretty good cooperation this year, so I just want to say kudos to everyone.
I have nothing.
I have several things. In the information items under my part is the race equity cohort, and thank you, John, for agreeing to represent the city on this. This is an important assignment. It's a 9-month work group on race equity because that's really sponsored by the League of Minnesota Cities. Sharon, you may want to make some comments on that also, but the you know, race equity is an important issue as we have continued growth of our regional center. It's a particular issue in the city of Marshall. Anything more you want to say, Sharon?
We are looking forward to council representation. We do have staff representation, and we also included a representation from Southwest State University, which we think that's really positive as well. So it'll be a learning opportunity, and hopefully we can carry it forward in practice.
Second item I bring up at the last meeting, I brought up a number of things, and one of those was the anticipation of the 2020 census. I think in a future meeting we should probably formally appoint a complete count committee. I know Kyle was working on that also. Next week is the Coalition of Greater Minnesota Cities Legislative Day on January 30th. Sharon, I believe you're attending. I plan to attend at least a portion of it if anyone else is interested. I believe Friday is the deadline. It has been extended because the agenda has changed a bit. The lunch speaker is now Governor Walz. So because of that, that has changed the the registration deadline. The following week then is the Transportation Alliance Day at the Capitol. I also will be planning to attend that. And then in conjunction with that, basically at the same time, the Highway 23 Corridor Coalition will be hosting a legislative reception at the same time. So I'll be attending both of those. At Highway 23 as a board member of the Highway 23 Coalition. I had two other things. I don't recall what they were. So with that, I think I'll move then to the next agenda item, which is staff report. Oh, I know what it was. And you may be going to talk about this too. Today we had a meeting with True Shrimp. That was a very very good meeting. The attending were Sharon and Jason and Bob Van Moore and Brad Rose and Tara Onken, and representing the True Shrimp was Michael Zabel and Ryan Nakamas and Andy
Easily.
Right, their government relations person. So very good conversation about a number of things related to their future plans. So discussion is still happening, so it's good. With that, Sharon?
Mr. Mayor and Council, I'm going to save my report for the closed session. We spent a lot of time on union negotiations in the last month, and that'll be my report.
Okay. Jason?
Nothing to report.
And Dennis?
I think, Jim, you raised the issue earlier about commercial property special assessments. And as one of the feasibility studies ties into the existing project that's under consideration, Ways and Means has had several meetings. We have looked at various formulations from other communities, and we have not forgotten. We are continuing to push that issue forward.
Thank you.
With that, I'll move then to our information items, which are there for including the building permits, our listing of upcoming meetings, and agenda item number 35 is to consider adjourning this meeting.
Are we going to go to a closed session first?
We are, so thank you for that. I'm sorry. Thank you.
You want to officially adjourn this meeting, Kyle, and
Oh,
then
you
we'll
do?
just
Okay.
have the
Yeah.
closed
All right.
session as a separate meeting.
Right,
All
then
right.
you had a work
Okay.
session.
Then I'll second Russ's motion.
Motion to adjourn by Russ, seconded by Jim. Discussion. We'll move to a vote. Close the voting, and that motion does pass. We will reconvene to consider going into a closed session following about a 4-minute recess.